Today I want to talk to you about another book that's been really impactful for me, and it's the book The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. And it's a great book. The subtitle is Belief in an Age of Skepticism. And if you don't know Timothy Keller's story, I encourage you to go and look it up. But Keller basically planted a church in New York, and his whole goal was to reach those who were far from God, either who had never met Jesus or who had met him and for various reasons left the church and turned away from God. And in this book, he goes through and he talks about conversations that he had as a pastor in this setting and how to respond to those. So I encourage you to read this book if you've had questions about God. Maybe you're going through some questions in your own life, or maybe some of your friends, your family, your children, your coworkers have questions about God. This is a great book on apologetics, but it's really practical. And just want to read some of the chapter titles for you. The first part is the doubts that we have, the doubts that come up. There can't be just one true religion. How could a good God allow suffering? Christianity is a straitjacket. In that chapter, he talks about how Christianity has this view of it's just a bunch of rules and expectations, and he tackles that question. The church is responsible for so much injustice. How can a loving God send people to hell? Science has disproved Christianity. You can't take the Bible literally. And then in the second part, he talks about reasons for faith. So he tackles some of those questions, but then he goes through and kind of like I did a few months ago, talking about evidence and reasons for faith, reasons for following the God of the Bible, Yahweh. He talks about clues of God, the knowledge of God, that there is sin, religion, and the gospel, the true story of the cross, the reality of the resurrection, and the dance of God. And I just want to read a few things here from the book. Whenever he's talking about the clues of God, he actually uses a quote from Collins, and he says, when you look from the perspective of a scientist at the universe, it looks as if it knew we were coming. There are 15 constants, gravitational constant, various constants about the strong and weak nuclear force that have precise values. If any one of those constants was off by even 1 part in a million, or in some cases 1 part in a million, the universe could not have actually come to the point where we see it. And then he uses Stephen Hawking, someone who has been very anti-Jesus, kind of part of the atheist movement. Stephen Hawking talks about the universe, and he says, the odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. I think that there are clearly religious implications. And elsewhere, Hawking says, it would be very difficult to explain why the universe would have begun in just this way, except as an act of God who intended to create beings like us. I like what he talks about whenever he's talking about the knowledge of God. He says, if there is no God, then there's no way to say any one action is moral and another immoral, but only I like this. So the fact that we understand and recognize that there are rights and wrongs tells us that there has to be something, someone out there who is right. And he points to the God of the Bible and Jesus as the one who is morally true. Now, as people push back against that and say, well, society can tell us what that is, but we can see just even in our own lives that our society's values are changing, and they're constantly changing. And what we say is right today, down the road could be wrong, and vice versa. And then I love that he talks about the reality of the resurrection. And I talked about that in my sermon a few months ago, and I encourage you to go and check that out if you have any questions. But the resurrection's true. It's real. There are evidences. There are people, eyewitness accounts. The fact that the disciples were willing to die for this. They wouldn't die if they knew it was a lie. Someone surely would have said, no, okay, we were just making this all up. The fact that women were the first ones to find the resurrection and that Jesus was gone. In that society, in that culture, they would have never made that up and used women. So I just encourage you, if you have questions, if you have doubts, if you have friends who are, check out Timothy Keller's book, The Reason for God. I would love for you to read it, ask some questions. Let's have a conversation, and again, hopefully see you soon. Shalom.